it may make sense to, well, basically whoever's here, like if this should be more beginner friendly or a little more advanced, because some of these things, these prompts kind of assume that, you have everything set up on Athens. But, G Hassan said, just do a trivial commit. And Linnea said, have an eye towards onboarding. So, yeah, I guess I have prepared to kind of just go through an example of what happens when we write to Athens. Something like what happens when you write something. So yeah, I guess I don't know, like what would be the best here. So, Sam's here. I know he's got some closure experience. Theobald's here. He's got some closure experience. Julio is pretty. Yeah. What do people think?
Real quick? So just for the sake of the recording, we are, everyone knows, recording this because we have lots of folks that can't meet at this time. So just a reminder, please mute your microphone upon joining. We know that it may be uncomfortable for some people to be on a live recording. So if that's the case, please make sure and choose an alias for your Discord name and write questions into the channel community notes. Meeting notes, and then we can ask your question as we find time. And I also want to just let everyone know that we have our meeting notes for the meeting itself in Rome. And if you'd like to contribute to that, you certainly are welcome. And as Jeff mentioned, we have discussions in our GitHub number 1139 that's related to this call. And so if you have any comments about tips or tools for onboarding others to a code base, we'd love to hear them. We'd also love to have any additional questions or prompts that you have after this call added there if you want to. So just want to welcome everyone. I'm really thankful that you're here, and I don't know about you, but I'm really excited. So thanks, Jeff.
I think you're muted. Well, yeah, are you recording right now then?
Yep, we're recording.
All right, cool. So if it would be helpful to know how much experience people have with the code base and Clojure. That way, we can kind of think about how we want to go about today's presentation, or just like call. So Sam has experience a little bit. Alex experience. Julio.
Atoms like know where I need to check the interact without. For example, with React, you have the React Dev tools. I don't know how to use that on your script and reagent and that stuff. But like, how can I make a contribution without knowing everything? Like something like that. How can I interact with the little pieces? I know this is a REPL. You can just do like there's some stuff to an atom and interact with the REPL. Stuff like that. That's what I want to see. What I would like to see. Oh, and also how can you like interact with the data script database? That would be awesome too for me at least.
Yeah. So why don't we actually just everyone say like what their goals are for this and like what they want to get out of it. And
could you repeat that question, Jeff? Because I couldn't hear it at all.
So I said, why doesn't everyone actually just drop into the page for this call and I like write down what they want to get out of this, what they would want to be able to do after this call. So Julio said, be able to like contribute. So that clarifies it for you guys, clarifies it for me, because I don't want to just, monologue if I don't know what people really want to get out of this.
Did you put the comments on the GitHub discussion already?
There is a GitHub discussion. I guess you could add it there, or you could add it in the Roam. I mean, the Roam is a little bit faster, and it might be better for live note taking discussion.
Yeah, got it.
All right, so Julio, be able to contribute, interact with DataScript database, knowing what component or piece of code is involved when I do an action in the app, something like React Dev Tools. Nice. Latte says overall introduction to codebase, understand current initiatives, problems being solved, partly for use in the bounty process, generally appear into the black box. Jack says this, be able to contribute, basic overview of architecture. Oh, whoops. Guidelines for contributing, what useful stuff can I work on now? Basic overview of data Julio. Sid want to contribute. Now I am more familiar with Reframe and DataScript. Paul says, understand the project to be able to help with fixes, implement new features.
This is the last mandatory also.
Did you read it?
Yeah.
All of it? What was it about?
Yosebo, can you mute yourself?
Oh. Yes, sorry about that.
Bottom left. Thank you. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, the most common thing is just get a general overview and introduction to the code base. That's kind of the main topic. Originally, again, like, I don't know, like, that itself is pretty broad. And so we're still learning about the best way to, I'm still learning about the best way to onboard someone to a code base. Like, I don't know if I've done it before, honestly. And so for me, like, I know it very well. So I don't like have beginner's eyes. I don't know, like, I already know too much. So it's hard for me to know, but I feel like just starting off with some basic examples would be like the best place to start. I think Linnea said don't go too deep on the code. That probably makes sense. It should be more like, how does like an interaction lead to data and some other like functions passing through the entire thing, but not literally diving into the code. Another way to understand a code base might be where are all the places state is managed. So part of it seems to be approaching from like, okay, let's just start with an example. I also kind of drew up this little mural when we had this Athens engineering board. And there's like a lot of flows that I did in the past when like things were really like a lot of like maybe big decision trees, you could say, or flows. This is kind of what I have today, what I did earlier today. And overall, like from like a life cycle point of view, like we have start and stop, and there's like a few other things maybe, but those are like the most important ones. And then we have interactions, you could say, which is like keyboard input, mouse input. Then we have sort of like the data side of things of like, okay, how does data get passed through the system? And then finally, how does that and eventually be shown to the user? So it's kind of like how I understand things at a very high level, I think. We don't need to know the intricacies of reframe or data script yet. We can touch upon it. But yeah, I think we can all understand like, okay, what happens at startup? It's a great place to start looking into the entry point of an app. What happens at shutdown is pretty basic. And then what happens when a user does something? So I don't know if I have it too much. I didn't think too much about mouse input. That's more specific to JavaScript. We are like a writing application, so a lot of the complexity is in the keyboard. So yeah, I mean, anything else? And some people are curious about Athens backend, so we should try to cover that today because I know Sid cares about that. And there'll be parts where when we do the writing to a block, eventually that will not go to the file system per se, but to a backend. So I think starting off, like a really, really simple example is like what happens when we open the left sidebar. So first thing you want to do when you have a development version of Athens open, so this kind of assumes that is the case. Like you've built it locally, you have all the dependencies. What happens? Well, when we have a development build of Athens, we can press Control T or Command T, and this opens Reframe. And Reframe, if you're in the React world, it's just a way that you manage all the state globally. So you can like see all these keys and values. And this is really helpful for when you just want to see the state, the global state. There's like local state as well. But basically, you can see, I'll start off with the mouse. That the left sidebar is being open and closed. And based on the state, the sidebar will be open or closed. Pretty straightforward. Kind of easier to tell when it's in night mode. And yeah, I mean, what's going on here? This is mainly handled with Reframe, and Reframe is like Redux from the React world. But basically, and yeah, definitely interrupt if you have questions at any point in time. And I think Linnea will moderate a little. But yeah, when you press this button, let's see. Well, first, there's this app toolbar. And again, I don't expect you guys to just know all the files, whatever, but this is just, that's what it is, an app toolbar. And we have all these buttons that do different things like merge a database, open settings, choose database. The first one on the left is toggle navigation sidebar. What's up?
I see that you have like a fork from Athens that's recommended.
Yeah, this is just it's not like it's a fork. It's like my personal Athens, like TangJeff0, like my personal GitHub. So it is really just Athens. Yeah, like I just create forks on my personal GitHub or branches. So I mean, when you press the left sidebar button, it dispatches a reframe event, which is like a Redux action, essentially. And first we have to define that event for it to be valid, so it's already been defined. And what this does is it changes the DB state from open to, if it's already false, it turns it to true. And if it is true, then it turns it to false. And so like it's either true or false, like whether it's open or closed, right? And we could actually jump to DB. It might be helpful to see it at this point in time. DB. But like again, this is just the reframe DB state. It is essentially what this is. This is just the reframe 10x, which is sort of like Redux developer tools, but for reframe. It just shows you all the state here. And like this is the initial state. But yeah, that's all that is happening when you do the update. It just turns false into true or true into false. And then in order to actually like update, we have to have a subscription, and a reframe subscription just like looks at this value and then it returns that value reactively. And then where is this called? Like we want to know in the view or the markup if it's open or not. We go to left sidebar, and then we can see that we subscribe to that state if it's open or not. And then if it is open, we add a CSS class called isOpen to some of the to these two divs. And if it's closed, we just add a class that's closed. So yeah, I mean, that's basically it. There's also, so state can be managed with reframe. It's generally easy to have like a global state. Sometimes you don't want to use like local state, which might be like React, like a single React or a single reagent atom. But the question is like, when would you use global state and when would you use local state? And a lot of times you can, like if nothing else uses it, if nothing else uses that state, like if it's open or closed, then you would probably just use React because like you don't need to add a bunch of like reframe code and like boilerplate. But in this case, we're also like this writing application, and we have two ways that we can open the left sidebar. We can do it with the mouse, or we can do it with like control backslash. So like that's an easy case where you would want to manage state globally and manage events globally, because like we can use the same reframe code for opening the sidebar with a mouse, and the same, and a lot of similar code for opening the sidebar with control backspace or backslash or command backslash if you're on Mac. So that's like a very straightforward example. It is mainly reframe. Haven't used DataScript yet. Can use every single reframe like construct out there, like effects or co-effects, but just like the core ones, which is like subscriptions, events, and yeah, that's it. Subscriptions and events. And you got to peek into one key value pair of our reframe database. So that was kind of just a quick reframe example.
So I know that reframe also have valid state. We also saw that reagent with atoms you have like a also global state. So I was thinking, and is it like a good practice to have some atoms or some kind of global state that use a few components, but it's just still like a small piece of the app? For example, have a state that's used by 4 components, and just passing the state around is too annoying. I just use an atom, but it's not global, but just fill it out.
Yeah, so is your question that could you just pass a single global atom to everything?
Can I use like global atoms for some features that are not just global state on atoms?
Yeah. I understand your question. Like basically all reframe is a global atom, and you don't actually need reframe to do what we're doing because sometimes people will just use a single atom, and all this is a map, right? It's not like it's not a graph database. It's just a map, and that's all like a Redux database is, or all a reframe database is. So sometimes people will just use a single global atom if the application is not that big. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, not really. So I was thinking more like, can I use an atom, like a global state in an atom, alongside reframe, or just?
Could you use a global atom and reframe? Yeah, I mean you could. Yeah, you definitely could. They're not mutually exclusive. Reframe is just kind of like this framework for managing global state. But if you wanted to use it, the left sidebar, you probably just have to like require some global atom at the top level, and just like use it here. One question might be like how does the left sidebar know if you press Control \. And we have a listeners file which adds a bunch of global listeners. So in JavaScript, there are local listeners and then there are global listeners. Global key bindings, local key bindings, and you like local mouse interactions and like global mouse interactions. So basically a local one might be like, okay, when I'm in this text area and I type, like what should happen? And we have keyboard shortcuts already, like Control B for bold, and even pressing up or down. That's being handled at a local level. But when we open and close this, it's global. It's like we're not actually in a block, and we can open and close the left sidebar even when we're in a block. So for these global listeners, sometimes we might press Control Z when we're not in a block. We might press \/ to open the left sidebar, Control Shift \/ to open the right sidebar, press Control T to open reframe 10x, Control K to open Athena, Control G for this thing. But it's a little buggy, but it's really fun. So we have these global listeners, and some of them have to do purely with mouse interactions. Some of them have to do with copy and paste. Some of them have to do with just changing the UI. But yeah, we basically have to create a global listener for Control \/ and some of these other key bindings. And those are like global DOM listeners. That's just a JavaScript thing. It's not ClojureScript or any ClojureScript library. But now going forward, like what happens when we write to a block? That's a little more interesting maybe, because we're using DataScript. So what happens when we write to a block? First, we have to click something. And then this block now says it is editing, and that's why it's like lighter than the rest of the background. We type, and then we unfocus the blocks. So right now our caret is focused into the text area. We click out, and that's called a blur event in JavaScript. And you can see that like the sync button flashed. And that means that if it's yellow, the data's like we're saving the database to the file system. If it's green, it means it's already saved. So we could actually open up first, like editing UID. We can see that, okay, we are editing this. And this just like does a lot of fancy stuff. Not important right now, but we do a lot of logging when we create a data script transaction. When we update the data script database, essentially. And this is the current state of a block string for this block. And if I type something else, you can see that, okay, so there's multiple transaction kind of datas. One of them is raw inputs. So we've got this block. Oh, and then this is a pro tip. If you have reframe 10x open, you can hover over the block and it'll give you some metadata. So this has a database ID and data script, and it has a block UID, so a different kind of ID. And we see that the inputs is to give that string the value ASD. So in data script, when we say that we want to give, okay, and then this thing, which is DBID, block UID, block string, this gets normalized into like a data script transaction, which is always 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like a 5 entry or 5 item like vector. So like this is the DBID 27341. It smartly knows that the block UID goes to this database ID, and then it knows this attribute block string should be ASD. This is like the time, transaction time, not that important. And what's more important is like this true or false. So every transaction, this last value is going to be either true or false. And if it's true, then that is like the new value. If it's false, that means we have to remove the previous value. So DataScript has a cool function that is called dbWidth. And it says like, okay, if I were to transact this data, what would the resulting datums be, the resulting transaction data be? So like, it's not just that this is true. We also have to say that the previous value was false. Control Z, we can see that. Yeah, that was the previous value. So then we have TX more, and overall this entire part of Athens I'm not super proud about. Like, I don't think they did a great job here, but I'm just explaining how it works now. So like how are links managed? Like what happens? Like a link is being created. Like how? Like that's the magical part, I think. And basically, we wait for the user to leave focus from the block, and then we look at the string, and we see, okay, are there any things within two links? And if there are, it'll see that, okay, we actually want to create a block ref to a page, to the node page that has ASD in the title. Then we want to add the first input, which is this. And then we add the more input, which is like, okay, let's like parse this for magical stuff. So for pages, for hashtags, for block references, let's like figure out the link there. And this is the final output. So this is false, ASD, and then we created this new string, which is ASD, and then ASD in brackets. And then we create a reference. And now if you hover over this, you can actually see we have a reference to this database ID in DataScript, and it's the page that says ASD.
So can I say just one thing in summary? So when you are on focus and you are typing, Clojure or the app deals with it as just as a strings. The moment you lose focus is the moment you transform that string to some kind of data structure, whether it has link or does not have link, right?
Well, the way that DataScript works is that you have these like different values. So like we have, like, this is just a value in the database. And then we create a link. We create a link between this entity and this entity, and we say that like a link does exist. That's what this means. So it's not like a data structure per se. It's just like this is an identifier to an entity, and this is an identifier to an entity, and this is the name of like a reference. Sorry, I don't know if I explained that well, but
but just it makes sense. But just to confirm, a block, what can a block have beside just a text and a link? Can it have like a brochure, like a style text?
can it have what?
Like we know now for no, you showed the example of when it has only text and it have text with linked text.
Yeah.
What else can it has?
Oh, like what types of data, like numbers or strings or like references? Is that what you mean?
I mean, yeah, but again, what number do you have a specific? If it is a string with number, then it is a string essentially, correct?
Well, like block
No.
order, this is an integer value.
Yeah. Those
Open
make
or
sense.
not, this is a boolean.
And
This
this,
is like a reference.
and when you say open, it means you are focusing on it, editing, right?
No, open, that's not what it means. Open means like if there's children. So right now this is open, now it's closed.
Yeah. So this is like a flag if you want to go loops into the children.
It mean like the open just means like do you want to show the children or not?
It does not mean if you have a children. It means if you show them.
Yeah, it doesn't mean if you have children or not. Children is also a reference. Yeah, it's also a reference.
Yeah. I mean, it makes more sense as you speak.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a bit blurred now, but I think as you speak, it would make more sense. Thank you.
Okay, great. So let's see what we're at here. Yeah, this is just more code stuff. So you like click into the block, then you are into some text area thing. And then when you are typing in the text area, you're like writing these characters. Eventually you blur, aka you unfocus. And then if the string is different, then we want to create this reframe transaction event, which creates a reframe transaction effect. And then we look at the string to see if there's any, bidirectional links or block references. And then we either write to the file system or we send it through a WebSocket to the backend. And then we re-render that, and well, that handles it for you. But so I mean, yeah, that's basically it. That's what happens when you write to a block. I wouldn't say basically, like, we didn't really look at the code, but at a high level, without getting into the code, that's kind of what happens.
Can you talk about the UID?
Can I what?
So I want about the UID. Is it unique for the page or it is a unique ID as a whole for the graph?
So DBID is DataScript's identifier. UID is Athens's identifier for a page or a block string, or for a page or a block. So basically we have the DataScript identifier and we have the application identifier. And the reason that we have two different IDs is that, I guess we want more So like the way we do block references right now. Let's see, ASD.
Can you say it is like separation of concern between the UI and the database?
What do you mean?
I mean that you don't want like everything in the database be pointed to the UI, because the UI may have more data, like it is open or it is not open. This is UI. This has not to do with the database, correct?
Oh, I'm not sure I understand the question.
I mean that you can use the ID for the state of the UI and that for the persisting data. And just my speculation. I'm not sure if I'm right.
Yeah, part of the data is stored in a database, and some part is stored only in reframe, right? Like what Jeff showed at the beginning about the left sidebar.
Yeah,
That doesn't interact with the database, just reframe database.
Yeah, and this is why you have two different IDs?
No, that's not why
No.
we have two different IDs.
Yeah.
So I guess, I mean, it kind of just has to deal with database mechanics, I think. But, well, for one, like you can just see that this is the block UID is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 characters, and the database ID, it just goes up. But basically, I mean, yeah, I guess this could be implemented using database IDs. One thing about DataScript though is that the database IDs like do not necessarily persist. So like you could reconstruct a database from Athens purely from like the block string and the block UID. But let's see, if you, let me think actually.
It's a database assigned
Yeah, yeah.
ID, right? So we
Yeah,
don't
it's a
have a
database
control
assigned
over it.
Don't have control over it. Yeah. Yeah, that's.
And is it because we are using graph-based database? Is it the node? This represents a node, correct? In a
Yes.
graph-based philosophy, yeah, node.
Okay, so okay, that's a good point. Yeah, so everything that has a block UID is a node in Athens. Like it's either a block or a page. But there are like other things that we could put in DataScript that are not actually, an actual graph in the node. So we've got the DataScript graph, and then we've got the Athens graph of blocks and pages. And we might want to use the DataScript graph to do other things, like store user data. We're not doing that really yet, but we could. So let's look at the schema. So like this is DataScript schema, and there are other attributes. So like each of these, this is an attribute, and then this is like the descriptor for the attribute. And there's actually a lot of other attributes that are not spec'd out, like block open, block order, block open. Those are not here. Block string isn't even there, and that's just because like I was maybe lazy and I didn't want to define things I didn't have to for the schema, because DataScript is like very flexible. You don't have to just define things in the schema, and you can still just create values in the database. The only things that you do have to specify are like when something is unique. So we have to make sure the block UID is unique. We have to make sure the node title is unique. And then when we're doing, this is not really used right now, but for block children, we have to define that we could have several children. And for block refs, we could have several references. Like this block is referencing this, but we could do this again. So yeah. Now, actually schema version would be an example here, and adders lookup. I don't really think either of these have to do with the graph, the knowledge graph. They just have to do with some like data. And this is actually like a good point to pull up schema. So like when I first started Athens, I just like basically exported my Rome database and I looked at all of the attributes in Athens or in Rome. Did like a count, so like edit time, edit email. This is just metadata. It doesn't really have anything to do with the graph, the knowledge graph. The block stuff does. Block refs, node attributes lookup, node title, but like user email or edit seen by or user UID, user color. All of these things would have, well, like these are attributes, but like you could have a user, basically you could have a user UID.
These are attributed to a node or not?
No, it's not. It's not, right? So like this is attributed to a user, not to a node or a block. And so
and all the nodes are attributed to user. Oh no. Maybe I don't want to confuse because when we add collaborator to online, it make it a bit confusing. Thinking that all the nodes are blocks related to a user, because some other user may edit. So yeah, I don't know if they were still the owners.
Yeah, I mean, the main point is that we had like two different types of IDs, and there's a data script ID, which we don't, which is just like, it always increases. We can't like force something to have an ID, really. And then we have the graph IDs, which is like a block UID for blocks or pages, and you know, we can kind of just create those arbitrarily. And this is the reference to the block UID. If we did the DB ID, I'm not sure if it would work. And actually, if you see in the transaction, it's much better to you can actually use this like UID as the database identifier because we know it's unique. And this is super helpful when we're going to do conflict resolution with like multiple writers, because it's very easy for two data script databases to have different database IDs. If we know that they have the same block UID, then we can kind of handle multiple writers more easily. So basically you would have two databases, like I have my Athens open and then like Stuart has his Athens open. We could have like the same graph, but we actually might have different database IDs. That's just the way that data script is implemented.
You may wait a second. You may like you both did the same page, but you both had different database. I just
you could
want
have different database IDs. You could have different database IDs.
Yeah, but is it physically the same database?
Yeah. No, because DataScript is its own database, and every single time you open Athens, like you open up a database in the browser. Now, if we have like a server in the middle, then that one might be a database that everyone agrees upon, at least for DataScript.
I see. So when you say, when you're referring to editing together, it was like B2B kind of protocol. Correct?
P2P?
Yes, because
P2P?
you don't need a
peer-to-peer.
Yeah.
I mean, I think people are working on peer-to-peer stuff. Actually, like Flurry might have some of that because you don't really necessarily need a server, which is Flurry is another database. But yeah, basically because, I mean, at least like DataScript is getting towards that, where you like have a full-on database in the client. Then yeah, it's it's more possible to do complete peer-to-peer stuff. It's still really hard, conflict resolution.
But no, it's just the idea got to my mind when you mentioned that the possibility of collaboration without having like a fixed backend. So,
without a backend. It's still like, I mean, it's hypothetically, I mean, I think it's like possible, but like, I'm not sure exactly. I think the
Yeah,
technologies there are
I
like
don't, I
less.
don't want to confuse everyone. Don't worry about it.
We've got a question in the chat.
So
596.
Sid asked what happens if we run out of blocks. How many is 9 to 16? That's it's like a big number. So if it's all internal, then it'll be a while before we get there. If we're doing cross-graph stuff, then maybe some namespaces would help that, but I think this is a problem that we can get to later. Let's see. So, I mean, yeah, that's kind of it. I think those are two like pretty solid examples. We can keep on moving forward. Whereas state managed, it's like 4 places. There's local storage, which is like in the browser, there's data script, there's reframe, and then there's like reagent, which is like a single component. The main difference is like reagent is just React, reframe is like Redux. So it's like global, this is local. The question of like when do we use reframe and when do we use data script is more just like there's a lot of like interaction stuff that doesn't need to like be in data script, like opening the sidebar. Like we could persist that, not super important. This might be more important to persist. It's currently in reframe, but like the state of the right sidebar. I mean, it would be nice to have this stick around throughout sessions. But that's kind of the main thing. And yeah, data script is more for the stuff that will stay around. So like the contents of your graph database. Yeah. So what parts are stable and what parts are not as stable? Let's say that I would just look at sort of the refactor issue 990. So yeah, walk transact, I said it wasn't great. Some of our Electron code is kind of rough. Like drag and drop, use a library for key bindings, we could use a library for. Figuring out how to highlight items. Like doing this is like a weird, kind of requires a lot of DOM stuff, but yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the views are somewhat stable now. So, and then the transact part is maybe it's a good time to talk about the backend. So DataScript has this transaction thing, and it's really nice. Basically, all you have to do is pass it data, and it'll update DataScript. But then we write our own code around transact because sometimes we don't want to just update the database. Like we don't just update block string, right? So like if there is something here, then we want to parse the block string to figure out, oh, there's actually a reference here as well that we want to create. So that means we pass in that flat transaction data, like datums, we call it, to an event in reframe, and then we have our own reframe effect. And the difference in reframe between event and effect is like event is generally always just pure data, which is really nice. And then effect, it means it changes something in the outside world that is like stateful, it's not pure. Maybe it like goes to the file system or goes to local storage, but it's not like pure data, it kind of like leaves the system. And we want to like walk this like transaction, sorry, it's like really ugly, sorry. But basically it says like, okay, we have the raw data. We want to see what would happen if we applied the transaction to the current database, the data script with the current database with the new transaction data, but we don't actually want to do it yet. We just want to see what would happen with that transaction, and that's like really cool. It's like maybe hard to do with SQL. And then we want to like look at that data, and with transaction kind of just like, well, first we just want to, we want to look for all the links, and this looks for links and block references and hashtags, and then we want to like concatenate the two, so that's just a single transaction, and then we actually transact it. But right now the way, and so one part that's like very evolving is the backend, which is like still super, it's not even alpha yet, but this would see like, okay, if there is a remote graph connected and it's running, then we would send these transactions to that sync, which sends it to the WebSocket server. And yeah, this is kind of like the part where it goes, where a transaction is sent to the backend. We haven't talked about like how it connects to the backend or anything like that, but basically, yeah.
Here at this comment, you said you send it to the backend, or this is like hypothetically how it's where it's expected to be at this point. Yeah.
What was the question?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to make a sense of that point. Is that you said it is not done yet, but this is at this point it is where it should be done at this phase.
Well, no, it's happening. It's happening. Like if we connect to a database, it is happening. It's just like buggy. So if I actually just connected this to a remote database, like it would actually send it to the database, but it might lead to some bugs or like some weird behavior.
I mean, the way the architecture works is that this code that run on Electron do the actual transaction, and the database is just a link that can be local or remote. Is that true?
Yeah, it's true. So it should be like very easy to switch between a local database and a remote database.
I see. But is it that about the authentication? Because we know if it is a remote, then we need to add extra measure, because I don't know, it has to be related to
authentication.
the authentication.
The authentication is just like a token right now.
I see.
But we could of course just make this better. Like we could make it an email link login. We could just make it a username and password.
I see. It makes sense. And just another question on this topic is for me. When we scale it, do you expect that, like I don't know about the architecture, I don't have experience in Clojure database, but do we get to have like for each user unique database URL beside the authentication, or is it that for every user they have their own database, or it is just one database and each user is a row? I just want to make sense of that point.
Can you ask the question one more time?
Again, so because it is like the model is that we have many users and each user have their own pages. So in database, do each user have like their own separated database URL, or is it like physically the same database and each user have a specific graph or one parent node, and these nodes connect to each other?
I think for right now, the collaborative version, every user has the same, just like reads one database from the server.
One database link, but it is is that they have different token only, not the URL.
Yeah, same URL, same database, multiple users. Everyone is just editing the same database. The same URL.
I see. So it is that if I do something, a new page, everyone else can see my page. Is it true?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. So this is the collaboration version. How it is
Yeah, that's the
implemented.
collaborative version.
And this is how it is the vision is that it is public, or you can have your own like a private thingy, or I'm just, or is it not discussed yet? I just wonder about this.
The vision would be you have your own personal database that only you have access to,
I see.
and you could like actually just open up other pages that people give you access to. So, for instance, I have my personal database, draft database,
Yeah.
but I could also
Yeah.
connect to the Athens team database,
Yeah, I see. So
and I can make references to the Athens database, and I could like open up May 16th, 2021 in like my database, and maybe the Athens database as well.
So you
But
can
no
say that,
from
yeah, user can share pages. Can we say that?
yeah,
And then if they give you access to that page, you can view it on your page, but it won't be your database. It would be like the list of pages or databases or blocks, or what we want to call it, that you have access to. This is the vision.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes,
Like roughly.
basically.
I see. Makes sense.
Essentially, yeah. Cool. Let's see any other points here. Dependencies. Yeah, just check out these files. Package.json, project.clj. A lot of small stuff. The most important things you have to know is just like data script and reframe and basic closure script. What tests are written? We don't have that many, mainly for the parser. I think we should have more for the parts that are like pretty data heavy. So like the parser, where it's just inputs and outputs, or like we could test reframe events as well, which is pretty much just data. But yeah, there's like a lot of interactions. It's like kind of hard to test UI. And yeah, that's like yeah, so that's not the cool things, code flows, source graphs, Miro, where you ended up in. I don't know if this is a startup that I found out about a while ago. I don't even know if they're around anymore because I emailed them and they didn't respond. But you can kind of just do like step-by-step documentation through a code base, comment on specific lines. Not sure if they're still doing stuff. Source graph is a technology I learned about this week. I started using it. Basically like a super powerful search for your code base. I could say like, and if you do the plain text search, you can also search by symbols. That's probably the most powerful one. Because then you could see, you can see like references. And like you can kind of already do that with text editors, like these other references, but I don't know, it's cool. All right, but I don't know if there are any other questions.
Can you show an example of displaying blocks? Like if I wanted to create a popover page preview, how would I access the block to display?
So yeah, if I hover over this and you want to like basically get a preview of this page, how do you want?
Yep.
Okay, so there's like a mouse interaction, and then there's a data script query, and then there's kind of like a render. So I would probably go to where this is rendered, and we have like a parse render thing. We have this render page link, and yeah, we could just like inspect it as well. We can see, okay, we got the span, and we have this like formatting braces. And you can see, okay, page link class. So yeah, that looks like it's it. Probably do something like on hover. Oh wait, no, that's a CSS thing.
All right, mouse over.
Like mouse over. Yeah. Mouse
I don't
over.
think it's hyphenated.
Let me see. Content. On mouse enter. Hi. So then we see that there's node. We're passing a node, we're passing a title. What happens if we print that? The node is a reaction. Probably shouldn't be a reaction, but whatever. We see there's a block UID and then node title. So yeah, we could either use block UID or node title. And then we would want to create like a drop down for this. And then we could probably even reuse just like the page preview thing, the node page. So basically on mouse over, we want to create a preview. Stand. Well, what would happen if we did node page? So node page. And then we could do node title. Let me just speak to the ID node. Or we could do node title. Title. It should be import this. Circular dependencies are.
You want to call a
Okay.
function, not a vector. Jeff,
This is a hiccup.
make it a yeah. It shouldn't be a hiccup. You're handling here.
Yeah, you maybe need to set some state and return that from the render page thing.
On mouse over. Yeah, we need to. But on mouse over, we should just like attach a DOM component. DOM, yeah. I mean, we don't want to change it up. You're right. We can't. We also can't have a circular dependency. So there's like kind of global state being created right now. I don't know the best place to, like, we could use reframe basically to say, like, okay, when I hover over here, we create a reframe. We update reframe with some coordinates. And then this could say like hovering. Oh, yeah, that's a good point. I don't know where exactly it should be. The component should be created. But on hover, we want to render preview, and we could. I mean, this is just a made-up function right now. And this render preview thing, just it knows where the mouse is, and then it creates a drop down at that. So maybe it makes sense to do it at the top level. Or so when we have like better drop down stuff, toolbar, left sidebar, the main view, right sidebar. I do think we could have like something like this, which is like a div or a drop down. And it's like style, position, absolute, or something like that. And this thing just like subscribes to like preview. Let's just assume that page preview, something like that. Doesn't actually exist, but you know, we're in preview, and then there's like preview. Could also do something else, which is like be like preview coordinates. Could also do like preview UID. And then this is like something that is like no page. This is like a drop down. So yeah, I mean, then we'd have to create the subscriptions for this, create stuff in the database, create events that update this when we hover over it.
You also need to deref it. All right, it's just, yeah, the subscription, the preview ID is a sub, so it's reactive. So in the 102, the line 102, you have to deref preview ID.
Yeah. Deref all stuff. I mean, I can keep going down this and actually implement it if we really want to, but
That's all right. It's helped a lot. Thank you.
I do want to hop in and say that it's about 2:08, so just being respectful of everybody's time. Anybody that has to hop off.
Can anyone else hear Linnea? It's like super soft.
Yeah, it is very, for me too. You need to raise up your mic.
Okay.
Linnea, you're like whispering.
All right. I'll have to check that later, but I just want to note that it's past 2, so if anybody needs to hop off, I just want to thank you for coming, and please make sure you add any additional questions to the discussions page in GitHub.
Yeah, second that. Let's see here.
Just a little one before closing up. That thing to run the queries for data script, how does it work?
How do data script queries work?
Now, the thing think that's always with Control G.
Yeah, I mean, I probably wouldn't use this actually. It kind of doesn't. It's a little buggy, and it's just a lot faster to run code in the REPL. So I think probably getting connected to the REPL is like one of the most important parts of Clojure. And
Okay, are you gonna show us now about the commit and if we need to do some styling, issue number, and just your standard process?
so there's some
Actually,
documentation
you,
here for.
will you show how you access the DB to the REPL? Because
Yeah, I can do that. How to contribute. So there's some style guides for GitHub here. But I wouldn't worry too much about the Git stuff, just like try to get set up.
And beside that, do we need to run something like to make sure like something like auto styling for code or some automated test? Are there any command? Or like
yeah, that's handled here, I think. CI test, but you'll get all to that later once you make the PR.
I see.
So
yeah,
for-
makes sense. So the priority for the PR, then for the CRT. Makes sense.
Yeah. So in order to get the REPL set up, it's different for each text editor. I'll show you IntelliJ right now because that's not what I use. But basically, we have this configuration. It says to go to port 87777, 8777, right? The end REPL port, connect to localhost. And we have some directions here too, I think, on how to get connected to a REPL. Yeah, so connecting to REPL. So I'll just we can look at that later. But in terms of running data script commands, you can connect to shadow render. That's the shadow.js build. And we can go to DB. And I don't know, let's get block document. Yeah, that's a good one. So then we can do just a git block document. Let's see. 27341. And that returns the data from DataScript for that upper level block. So we could git block just gets one block, but we want the document, meaning that we want all the children. So we can see that this is.
So you don't need to even like load the file or anything like that. Just like thanks.
Yeah, I mean, like eventually you want to be able to write your own queries, but like this is just a pull statement. Like this is a wrapper around Posh, which is DataScript. For now, we're using it like this way, but we're not using it very well. But this is the pull statement from Posh. This is our global DataScript database. This is the list, the vector of attributes we want. DBID, block UID, block blah, 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 children, and this means children recursively. This is all the references, and we want the back references as well. You can really easily do that with DataScript. And we pull it in the ID, and the ID could be the DataScript identifier. It could also be a block identifier. So I think that's over here. And you can see you get the same thing. But it's like super fun, just like getting into DataScript and like just like running a bunch of queries. So this is just like the best way to learn DataScript is to just get in the REPL and just run a bunch of commands because it's like there aren't really too many really great online data log REPLs, and data log is super like crazy when you first learn it. And this is just the fastest way to like test things out and to learn a lot. So I think this would pull everything every tuple in the database. It doesn't even print because it's so huge. But let's see, we could say where block UID. And this is every single block and node in data script. So some of these are anything that has the block UID. Any like tuple that has block UID, give the entity the data script identifier, and then give me the value of the block UID. And again, like we could just pass in this value, and we would only get that single block identifier. So no longer this. And that gives us the entity ID. So again, 27341, block UID, whatever. And then there's like so much stuff that you can just do with data script. It's kind of crazy. That work. Pull syntax. We're gonna do the pull in query. Just making things up right now, but there's a lot of like crazy syntax. I can put a period, and that'll return just the value, whereas normally data script returns a set of vectors. I don't know. There's a lot of fun stuff you can do here, and that's the best way to learn. Is just to play with data in the REPL for Clojure script. And yeah, this is some of docs on how to connect to Athens through the REPL. Any other questions?
Can we have a little demo of the dev card system?
Oh, sure. Yeah, dev cards are a little out of date, but over here. So Shadow CLJS is sort of like the compile manager for ClojureScript. You can kind of think of it as Babel.js. And basically you have multiple builds. We have the app build, we have render build, we have main build, we have dev cards, and then Karma test, which I'm not sure if I've ever used. It might be in the CI. But dev cards, or so main is Electron. It's a Node.js, which is for Electron, and we have one file for that. Everything else is either render or main. And there really isn't a huge difference between render and main, or app and render rather. But the app is if you're just going to go to the website. So for dev cards, it might not totally work, but this is called Teamworks.
I think I remember reading in the docs that if you are making changes to UI elements, you have to also include dev cards in the PR.
Yeah, that is out of date. You don't need to do that because if we go here, like this is not up to date. This is not really styled properly. Some of the imports kind of work, but this was like really helpful when we were first starting out and we didn't have like an entire application connected to itself that like actually just didn't break all the time. So it helped having things in isolation, and that's still like a great way to develop. But yeah, I don't think it's not necessary for me to do development any faster anymore. it's still good to have like design system and whatnot, have all these like components, but it's not
Okay, cool to know.
we haven't.
I mean, I don't need to spend time on that area.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, can I ask a question, or you doing something now?
You can ask a question.
Yeah, I was want to go back a bit for the graph model thing, and I know that we have a block, and a block is a node, and a node can be either one block or the page, correct? So far.
Yeah, block UID can go to a node or a block, a page or a block.
And what do you call when we have link to them? It is when a block link to other block. What kind of connection we have? Because we could have blocks inside the page that they are connected to each other because they share one parent which is the page, but we can also have block linked to other page. So how the database distinguish between two different kind of connection, or is it the same?
So we have block refs to show if there's a link between this block. This block is linked to this page. So we have refs right here.
Yeah. But again, so is there something? So if you have just blocks without links in this page, if you have like random random blocks, then this block is there something to say about the relationship with the page because it is inside the page and they push our nodes, correct?
Yeah, so the relationship between this bullet and these bullets is these are block children
Of the main block.
of the. So yeah. So the relationship between this and these is that this is just a parent with children. So I'll show you.
But yeah. But how do I know if the parent is a page, not a block with sub-blocks?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Hold on. So this is just bold page, the entire page itself. So get node document, node title, May 16, 2021. And you can see that this says, this is the title, this is the UID, and then this is the database ID. The only way to determine if something is a page, so if both page and block have UIDs. So this has a UID and it has no title. And then this has block string and this has block UID. Unfortunately, this is just like.
I mean, I think it would be easy to add a probability to say it is a page, but I don't know if it would be useful or do we need to add this? I just wonder.
So it's kind of just derived implicitly. So if it has node title, that means it's a page. If it has block string, it is a block.
It means it is a block inside a page.
Yeah. However, it's like not explicitly enforced. So technically, a block could have both a block string and a node title.
You mean we don't have a mechanism to force that?
What?
To force that distinguish?
To distinguish two? I mean, no. You probably could distinguish it, but like we don't have to with data script.
Alright, I see. And just to make it draw a full image for me. And then when you see like all the connection of a block or of a page, how do you like handle that? Do you look do you care about if the block is a page or it is a block in a different page, or it does not matter? You just call if it is blocked on a different page. I'm not sure if I make sense.
It's a really good question. It's a good question. Basically, there's like there's a very small difference between pages and blocks. We have a node page and then a block page, but they're like very, very similar. And like you can see right here, if it has title, then we try to render it a node page, and if it has string, we try to render a block page. But you know, if I were to click here, we see that there's like references. And if I were to click on this block string and this block ref, you can see that there's children, and then there's also link references. So they're actually very, very similar. They share a lot of code, they share a lot of logic, and even like, yeah, very similar implementations. And it's really just an arbitrary distinction. And like people talk about it all the time in blocks versus pages discussion. It's a very popular discussion, I guess.
Yeah. Makes sense to take deep into it. So you deliberately don't distinguish for them, or it is like it's part of the architecture.
What do you mean?
Yeah, it depends on the context. If you are showing a page, then you just stick for the node title. But if you showing references, it does not matter that much.
Yeah, there's not a huge difference between blocks and pages. Like if we go to block page, we can see that we actually, for a node page, we use it in places like we use node page here. We use node page code everywhere in the block page. Really the main difference is like this has block page, doesn't have unlinked references. Although like, it probably could, to be honest.
I mean, it makes sense to think about it. Is that maybe how it makes sense in terms of users? I mean, yeah, we need to distinguish between the user experience and how is that. So they are related. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
All right. Any other questions? Cool. Well, feel free to always share them in chat, and I think we'll follow up with the recording for this call and everything. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining today. This was like really fun.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone for joining. Have a great day.